I'm Travis Daly, and you're listening to Fishing with a Fly, where I interview experts in the fly fishing industry. Henry Cowan joins us in this episode to talk about fly fishing for carp. Henry is a fly fishing guide out of Georgia and spends most of his winters chasing stripers on Lake Lanier and his summers in search of carp. Let's go ahead and jump. Hey, Henry, thanks for sitting down with us today. Before we start, just tell us a little backstory about yourself, why you started, or when and why you started fly fishing, and what led to you opening up your own guide service and shop.
Well, I started fishing back when I was a little kid. My dad was a big fisherman, so he started me out fishing as a youngster, growing up in New York City, and I mean literally in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York. And believe it or not, as you know, Manhattan is an island. There's a lot of great salt water around New York. So that's where I cut my teeth fishing. And I wasn't a fly fisherman. My dad actually fly fished quite a bit for bass up in an area called White Lake, New York. So I used to watch him fly fish. I was a conventional kid until probably around 1990. My wife and I moved up to Stamford, Connecticut back in the late 80s. And I came down. I was striper fishing in Long Island Sound in Connecticut and saw these three young guys walk up on the beach next to me while I was throwing a spinning rod and a bucktail, and these three young guys were fly fishing. And the next thing you know, all four of us were hooked into fish, and that was the epiphany. That's when the light bulb went off, and I just said, this is something I've got to try. It looks like just way more fun than what I'm doing. And so that was kind of how the addiction started, was probably back around 1990. Got a fly rod and started trying to cast for stripers on my own, tried to self-taught myself how to cast, and one thing led to another, and I guess I was pretty good at finding fish up in Connecticut, and started to build a reputation. And then back in 1997, my job took me to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was already, fully engulfed in the fly fishing game. And when I got down here, I started to learn about how to catch these landlocked stripers down here in Lake Lanier in Atlanta. And, I found that they could be caught just like the ones up on the Salt that I had fished from basically, Maine down through New Jersey all my life. I realized that those fish could be caught the same way down here, but really nobody was doing it. And after a couple of years of fly fishing down here, by around 1999, 2000, after having lived down here for a couple of years, one of the largest fly fishing shop in Atlanta, the Fish Hawk, had asked me to take some of their clients and take them guiding for striped bass. And the owner, Gary Merriman, had said, "Hey, would you take a few of my clients out?" And I had absolutely zero interest in guiding. And he had asked me several times over the course of the next 2-3 months, and finally I caved and said, "Fine, I'll take a half a dozen of your best customers out." And then the next year it went to 10, and then the next year 15, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, Travis, I'm guiding.
That is awesome. So it just kind of grew organically.
It kind of did. I to this day I don't advertise, to be honest with you. It's all word of mouth. I'm as busy as I want to be. I still have a full-time job. I mean, I'm not a full-time guide. Mm-hmm. Though I do get out on the water probably 150 to 200 days a year, just because my real-time job that feeds the family allows me to work out of my basement most of the time when I'm not on the road. So it affords me the opportunity to get out and fish a whole lot.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Perfect. So let's dig a little deeper into one of the fish that you're currently guiding for, carp. Carp's they shot up in popularity with fly fishermen in the recent years. Everyone's kind of trying to do it. Can you explain the basic setup for fly fishing for carp, like the rod, reel, line, like what you need to use for carp?
Yeah. So carp are a very interesting fish. They're not easy, as you know. Mm-hmm. They're tough, but that's what makes them so interesting to people. That's why people, I think, really like carp, is because they're so challenging, if you will.
Yeah, I agree.
Carp, fishing for carp, I explain to people, it's like going red fishing or bone fishing, except that you're throwing to a permit.
Yeah.
That's really the best way to, they don't eat like a redfish, and they absolutely don't eat like a bonefish. Mm-hmm. They are more likened to a permit. But so the basic carp setup can be anywhere from, a 6 to 8 weight would be an ideal outfit. I personally like 7s and 8s for my fishery. Now, the reason I say my fishery, and Travis, I don't know why this is, but where I'm fishing down on the Chattahoochee River off the Oxbow Lakes of the Chattahoochee, our average fish is anywhere from 10 to 12 pounds. They are cookie cutter fish.
Yeah.
And I am telling you that I have shots at fish in that 14 to 18 pound class way more often than I have shots at fish 7 to 10 pounds. I don't even see fish that are 4 to 6 pounds. I don't know where they are. I've in 7 years of fishing down here, I've never seen them. Now, there are plenty of fisheries that I speak to other anglers and other guides across the country that are just low, like right across from us, not far, just across, just down the road. I'm fishing the Chattahoochee fishery, but those coming out of the Savannah River just below Lake Hartwell, there are some oxbows and flats that you can fish on those rivers for the common carp, and their average fish is 4 to 6 pounds. Now, that doesn't mean they can't catch or see 10 and 12 and 15 pound fish, but their average cookie cutter fish is 4 to 6 pounds. And a 6-weight rod is absolutely perfect for that fish. But my fish, they're averaging 10 to 12 pounds. So when you hook up a 6-weight rod is a little much. You just can't get that fish under control with a 6-weight as well as you can with a 7 or an 8. Mm-hmm. So I prefer a 7 or 8 weight rod. I also prefer a reel with a good drag system, something that can hold 100 to 150 yards of backing, something with a smooth drag. Not that you couldn't fish a click and pawl, a spring and pawl. You certainly could fish a click or reel, but I think you're better off with having something with drag. I also happen to like a rod that's a little bit faster in action, not too fast, not like your typical saltwater rod, but something that's fast enough that if you upline it, it'll allow you to load the rod quickly. And the reason I like that is because many times you have to make a quick cast because all of a sudden these fish appear like ghosts. You have some glare in the water, and the next thing you know, the sun is just right, and boom, there's a fish 30 feet in front of you, or 30 feet at 11 o'clock, and you got to quickly make that cast because the fish is coming at you. Mm-hmm. So you want a rod that allows you to, and a line and an outfit that allows you to load that rod and, so to speak, fish with an urgency, a sense of urgency.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
So consequentially, my 7-weight rods are loaded with 8-weight lines, and my 8-weight rods are loaded with 9-weight lines. Oh. And so that's my basic setup. So there's no specific brand that I think is a quote unquote carp rod. I mean, there's a lot of rods I like out there. I think I happen to, my personal favorite rods are, I happen to like the Orvis Helios 7-weight. I also happen to like the TFO BVK 7-weight. Those are two of some of my favorite rods. I haven't personally fished it, but I fished the 8-weight Meridian, not for carp, but I think that would be the Scott Meridian. I think it's a great rod, and you can easily get away with any of the Sage. The Sage 1 would be an excellent choice for carp. Again, as long as you're uplining those rods, you'll be able to make those quick casts. And for me, my line of choice, without a doubt, is a Rio redfish line. Okay. I just think that's the best line on the market for carp fishing.
Awesome. And that's just pure floating? Do you try any intermediate or?
No, okay. No, all floating? Pure floating. A floating Rio redfish, which comes in a light blue color, perfect, is just an absolutely fantastic taper, and handles the little bit colder water that you can get in some of the rivers, as well as the warm water, because it's a redfish line. Mm-hmm. I just love the way that line is designed. That is my go-to line, believe it or not, for carp, for redfish, for bonefish. I just think it's a wonderful line.
That's awesome. What are most of your hookups within, like, how long of the cast you typically make to a fish, or is it all within?
That's a good question. We will typically spot these fish many times 50, 60, even sometimes 70 feet out. Oh, wow. But it's so hard to get a customer to cast accurately above 50 feet. So I like to tell them to let me get them into 40 feet or even 30 feet to make that accurate cast. But a lot of guys just, They see that fish in 8 inches of water, 50 feet away, and they start bombing those casts
Yeah.
out.
They gotta give it a
Sometimes they
try.
spook them, and sometimes they don't. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
But I think the sweet spot is that 30 to 40 foot cast.
Okay. Where you can just really nail it and
But,
spot
Trav-
on. Makes
but
sense.
Travis, I have to tell you, I can't tell you how many times I've hooked fish 10 feet in front of the boat.
No, really? Wow. So when you're
So,
fishing for these carp, what fly patterns are you typically using? Is it just a redfish or a bonefish pattern, or do you have your own carp
no,
patterns?
no. I mean, there's a lot of real, I'm not as pattern driven as I am color driven
Okay.
to
Okay.
carp flies. So, for me, it's the way I choose a carp fly is twofold. As far as color goes, I like dark colors.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, blacks, browns, olives, and rusts. And if you really wanted me to narrow that down, blacks and rusts are probably my two favorite colors, followed by brown, followed by olive, for our waters that are tannic. Now, I know some of the guys out west fishing, Montana, Colorado, Idaho for carp. They a lot of them like they go after more of an olivey color at sometimes. One of the hot, so I'm not really pattern driven as much as I am color driven. Carp love silly legs on flies, so
Mm-hmm.
anything sometimes you can put some silly legs can be very, very helpful. So it'll give that crayfish pattern look to it, and it can be very, very helpful. Believe it or not, one of my favorite flies is just a regular gold bead black woolly booger.
Oh,
Just
really?
maybe in a little bit smaller for me, like a size 8 or even a size 10 works nicely.
Okay.
And then there are times where we're getting refusal after refusal, and I got to throw something like, and pardon me for saying this, but a pink glow bug, just a weighted pink glow, an egg pattern will work. And
Yeah.
and carp really like pink. I don't know why, but they do. They like orange. They like pink. Their brighter colors can stand out to them. Guys over across the pond in Europe are very, very big proponents of using, super bright colors.
Oh.
And I've caught them here. One of the hot new patterns on the carp scene the last 2 years has been that fly called a hybrid,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of like a mix between a nymph of some sort and a San Juan worm. It's got a little bit of a vermeil red piece coming off the back end of it. So it's got sort of an aquatic insect, sort of like a worm-like look. It's sort of a hybrid of the two. So that's been a hot pattern lately. And then I have a fly that I designed it's not, we just call it a carp booty. And basically, Travis, what it is it's a tungsten bead that we put on a 60-degree bend jig hook, on a size 10 60-degree bend jig hook, and then I just tie a woolly booger, but instead of using marabou on the back end, I use rabbit. I just like the way I can make it shorter and smaller. My
Yeah.
fish tend to go for smaller flies. So rather than use the marabou, I cut the rabbit off the hide and tie on just a regular black or just a rust colored woolly booger tied on a 60-degree bend jig hook, and I push that tungsten bead all the way up onto the bend of the jig hook. And what that does is when that fly hits the water and sinks to the bottom, the ass end of the fly sticks up. It just goes immediately. It stands on its head because that tungsten bead makes the fly ride up on an angle.
Yeah. It's brilliant. So you notice like the carp really go after that attraction, that little waving in the water.
Oh, there's no question that will attract them. It's funny. Carp, you have to tease them. They don't
Yeah.
eat so well. You really have to, quote unquote, feed the fish.
Yeah.
And so it's all a matter of getting into that zone, if you will, of what gets the carp to follow and eat the fly. We get can't tell you how many times we're fishing, we get a perfect cast on the fish 35 feet away, and the fish follows us 15, 20 feet and then sees the boat and turns off, and the angler just could not feed the fish.
Yeah.
It's a matter of slow strips followed by a little pause and pulling it very slowly, like 2-inch strips, like a crab, like you'd crawl a crab on a permit flat. Yeah. And you really got to tease that fish and make them want to eat. And that's what carp fishing, at least in our part of the country, is all about. And I spoke to guys out on the West Coast like Dan Blanton, who was just fishing the Columbia River. The Columbia River up there in Oregon, they do a lot of what they call drop and drag kind of techniques, where they cast past the carp and let the fly drop and drag it into its feeding zone, and then immediately just lift when they get the fly into the carp zone. And the fish is either there or he's not there. We can do that some when they're mudding and bubbling, but for the most part, we need a perfect cast on top of the fish rather than that drag or drop. The drag and drop is really, well, I should say the drop and drag is really good when the carp is tailing or mudding and bubbling. But when that fish is crawling on the bottom, that drag and that drop and drag isn't going to work. You've got to put that fly and look at your angles and make sure you get it right on top of his nose, or what we call throwing it on the pie plate.
Yeah. Do you notice if most of the takes are taken on that pause, or when the fly is still moving, or does it kind of vary with the fish?
It varies fish to fish, but I think a lot of times when you're stripping that fly in with those small 1 and 2 inch strips and that thing keeps moving, you'll see the fish following it. You'll absolutely see the fish following it. And if you strip, and then stop, wait 2 seconds, strip, you'll see him kick his tail and flare his gills and suck the fly.
That's awesome. So do you have a hard time with your clients is kind of teaching that mentality of the strip strike rather than raising your rod tip up as like what you do with trout fishing, or is it kind of?
I'm actually a believer in the trouting.
Oh, really?
When you're carp fishing, I like when you trout set.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not, the strip strike works great. The problem is many times when those, my fish are educated. My fish, just so you know, I'm telling you that my fish, even though they're in the Chattahoochee River here in Georgia, I'm telling you, my fish went to Stanford University, right? These are some of the most educated carp in the world. And so where a strip strike can be very effective, obviously, or a combination thereof, strip striking and trouting, as we will. That's usually what I do. It has to be a quick set and not a hard set. Most of my anglers that carp fish are saltwater guys. Mm-hmm. So they're used to giving a good pop. But most of my anglers are not used to fishing 8 and 10 pound tippet. They're used to fishing 12 and 15 and 20 and whatnot. And so, you got to be really gentle with these fish. Mm-hmm. Trouting them is not a bad thing. That hook, if that hook finds anywhere near around that carp's mouth, it's so rubbery and soft.
Yes.
Even trouting, it's going to find its way in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You might be the first person I've ever heard say that. Most everybody just pressuring that strip strike rather than sitting like a trout. So that's cool. It's cool to see it both ways.
I do. What I do is actually a combination. Me personally, I like to strip and lift the rod up at the same time.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's not a hard strip strike. If I can't tell you how many of my anglers would strip strike and pop the leader. Pop the fly off the leader just because they set too hard.
You just basically coming tight and then
these are not little fish.
Yeah. Definitely doesn't sound like it. Awesome. So what if someone wanted to go out, maybe not in Georgia, maybe just somewhere in their lake or their city, and they want to go find carp on their own? Do you have any suggestions on how to do it on their own? If they didn't want to hire a guide to take them out, they wanted to just do it all on their own, collect their gear, and then find that carp, what would you suggest they first do?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. The best thing is, the one thing that the beauty of fly fishing today, as well as the curse of fly fishing today, is the internet. Mm-hmm. And so, the nice thing is there's more information available to everybody because of the internet. And the first thing I would suggest is get on one of these, log on to a board or a chat room or whatnot with other fly anglers. Tell them how you want to start carp fishing and, start PMing one another. Nobody's going to want to put their favorite carp spot on the internet and tell people, oh, go over here. But if you tell somebody, hey, I'm looking to start carp fishing and I live in, wherever it is, Sioux City, Iowa, and where would be some good places to start. Please PM me to get me in the right direction. Much appreciated. I think then you're not exposing spots to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wants to be nice enough. There's usually always a few anglers out there. They're going to be willing to share and say, hey, I'm not going to put an X, but here are some drainage ditches. Here are some, oxbow lakes. Here are some rivers with some softer currents that you can find them. Here are some ponds, that may have grass carp in them versus the commons. So, it's all a matter of where you're living and what areas are available. Shoot, I mean, if you lived in New York City, you could start in Central Park, and there's carp in Central Park. That would be the first place to look.
Uh-huh.
So, that's one thing to do. The next thing to do is, go out there without the rod one day and bring your polarized lenses. You got to have a pair of polarized glasses and go out there in the middle of the day with the sun high, where you can see best, and walk around and look around a little bit and see what you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the first place to look. Of course, there are going to be grass carp in a lot of ponds. And if you have permission, or there's some, public ponds that you can go into, you can certainly always find some grass carp in those ponds. I will tell you, grass carp are the dickens to get to eat. They are much harder to get to eat than a common carp. The common carp are carnivores. The grass carp are not.
Yeah.
So I always think if you're going to start carp fishing, I always think the best eaters are always in the river systems, or if you're going to fish a lake, if it's got a tailwater attached to it where there is a river system attached to the lake, fish up in the headwaters of the lake where the river system is about to dump into the lake. Those are the places where you're going to find the carp feeding the best.
Okay. Awesome. And you mentioned grass carp. Do you have any suggestions on how to catch those grass carp? Because I've had some difficulties actually trying to hook up with them significantly.
Well, let me ask you this, Travis, not to get too personal with you. Are you a religious sort of fellow?
I'm not, no.
Okay, well, that's probably one of the reasons why you haven't caught a grass carp. You have got to go to church at least 10 times a year if you expect to be able to hook and catch a grass carp.
Yeah.
You have got to have the Almighty on your side to catch those things. But truthfully, it's light leaders. It's stalking these fish and throwing really small flies right in front of their faces, like little yellow woolly worms is a good grass carp fly. Little sort of chartreusey kinds of greens, not a bright chartreuse, but maybe just like a yellow chartreuse kind of green in an RLD, a rubber-legged dragon, is a really good grass carp fly. It's got to look like something that would be hanging on the grass or in the grass, that kind of, algae kind of looking.
Okay.
Looking thing. I'll tell you, one of the great carp stories I've ever heard was from a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, Lefty Cray, told me this story. He was fishing. He went carp fishing down in Florida, and he was fishing with a guide who was not guiding him on boat, but rather by foot. And I'll leave the guide's name nameless because he's still around and he still goes. Takes people fishing on land. He's known as a land captain down in Florida. And these carp that he took them to happened to be feeding on some sort of a berry or that would come off of a tree. And they really couldn't get the carp to feed that day. So Lefty had his fly rod with him, and the land captain came over to him and said, look, you stand over here and get ready to throw that egg type pattern that he had colored up like a berry. And the guy took a spinning rod with a lead sinker on the end of it, cast it up into the tree. And when the sinker hit the tree, the monofilament wrapped around the branch about 5 times. And he started giving a yank with that spinning rod and started shaking the tree so that the berries dropped and the carp came from everywhere. And he's yelling, now, Lefty, cast now. And so he kind of chummed the waters for him. And I thought that was just a great story of how they used the berries from the tree to imitate a quote unquote an artificial hatch, if you will.
Yeah, that is hilarious. It's a great story. So when you do most of your fishing, is it mostly sight fishing, or do you do some blind casting, as in just like throwing it into a channel, or is your blind casting just throw into like mud mud holes.
Yeah,
where you
I
see
don't
'em actually
blind cast
mudding.
at all. We
Okay.
do zero.
Okay.
Travis, we do zero blind casting. For me, carp fishing, it's all sight casting. We don't throw at anything we don't see. It's just that what we're looking for, there's a number of things that we're looking for that we can throw at, whether we're seeing the fish or not. Obviously, it's always best when you can see the fish, obviously. But sometimes you don't see the target. Sometimes you're in a little too deep of water. Like you can see the fish clearly when they're in 8, 10 inches of water, 6 inches of water. Sometimes we're in 18 inches of water and the water's a little tannic, so you can't see that fish. But what you do see is the bubbles coming up from the fish rooting in the ground. And when he's rooting underwater, like a bonefish would or like a redfish would, trying to suck in, whatever aquatic insects or crayfish or whatnot are down there, when he's rooting with his mouth in the ground, he's going to strum up sort of methane gas that's going to come up and make bubbles on the surface. And when you see that bubbling coming up along with a little red stain around it, that is a carp rooting in the bottom. That's when you can do what we call that drop and drag technique, where you can throw past the bubbles, in line and past the bubbles, let that fly sink and drag the fly right into the fish's feeding zone. So that's one way that we can, it is blind casting, but we know there's a fish feeding there because of him rooting in the bottom. So that's one of the ways. That's what we call mudders and bubblers. And we constantly look for those, especially in deeper water. We also look for tailing fish, where you actually see the tail out of the water, because fish is in 6 inches of water. It's an 18 or 22 or 24 inch long fish, and there's not enough water for him not to be sticking his butt up out of the surface so you can see him tailing. So we throw at those. We also see fish that are tailing underwater. We might be in 12 inches of water and you see a fish whose nose is stuck in the mud, and you see him wagging his tail just 3 inches under the surface. So we throw at those too. Those are two kinds of tailers, the ones that are above and the ones that are below the water column. Then we also throw at fish that we call crawlers. Those are fish that we actually see moving in really shallow water looking to eat. They're already on the bottom and they're just moving from point A to point B, and we call those crawlers. We absolutely throw at those fish, and throwing at a correct angle is the key to hooking up with those fish. And then finally, the last set of fish that we try not to throw to unless we have to are what we call the cruisers. And cruisers are fish that are floating up high on the surface. Those are fish that are just moving from point A to point B before they sink and feed again. Those are really hard fish to feed. And we try not to throw at them unless that's all we have to throw at. But I'd prefer not to throw at a cruiser. I mean, I've caught them, but if I tell you, Travis, I've probably caught, I'm going to say I've caught a total of a half a dozen cruisers in 7 years.
Oh, wow.
So those are not very good odds.
Yeah. Definitely doesn't sound like it. Well, Henry, it's been a blast. Thanks again for taking the time to speak with us. Before we go ahead and sign off, where can everybody find you? Like, give a plug to your website, or where should everybody look you up?
Well, if they want to get a hold of me, they can give us a call at 678-513-1934, or they can go to our website, which is www.henrycowen, Cowen, flyfishing.com, and they can look through the website and see all the stuff we're doing down here.
Awesome. And I'll go ahead and include all of that on the show notes. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes at fishingwithafly.com/podcast for all the links, products, and tips. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.